Hi, it's Susan from Worldpeacefull, and I thought I would talk about greed. I definitely had inspiration today around that subject matter. My friend, her friends are selling their house, and there was just a small incident this morning where the real estate agent put an open for inspection sign out the front when it was an auction. So they were trying to squeeze, at the last minute, hoping someone might come in and buy the house before auction, because they obviously get less from an auction. It's also not very good weather today. And she was annoyed, my friend, because she's in her pajamas and she doesn't want people walking through the house. And so we had a discussion about the greed that's driving that decision to put the sign out the front. Now, admittedly, we could be jumping to a conclusion. Maybe they did get the wrong sign, but somehow I feel as a real estate agent, they know the difference between an auction sign and an open for inspection sign. And there's an inspection listing, so they have clearly articulated when those open inspections are. So it just got us talking about greed, and I said, isn't it interesting, people are just thinking of their own interests. They can't see the interests of the other people because they want to sell the house. They want to make money. So what money does, and the pursuit of it, is creates a blindness in people towards other people. It is a dysfunction. There's no question about it. Greed is, I think, a mental health issue. I think it's a disease. I think it's so indoctrinated into our culture that you have to make money and that you look for opportunities everywhere. You're not looking for opportunities on how you can help someone. And anyone who helps someone, they're clearly a loser or they're valued much, much less. And yet, in the moment of that need for someone to help you, that person's worth a great deal. So this video is really to explore greed, this insanity that's happened all around us for, I'd say, around a decade or more. I mean, the pushing of economic growth has been building up since the Industrial Revolution. The globalisation of multinational companies who don't reside in one nation state, who, what they would say in economics, straddle the world, as they have componentry in all parts of the world, they have workforces in all parts of the world. The governments tend to kowtow to them because they want employment so they can be re-elected. So self-interest would be driving that, not the interest of the people working, although they would promote that they're getting people jobs and what have you. But ultimately, it's not about that. It's about re-election. This constant, vigilance around the self and what benefits the self is the selfishness that is the embedded structural teaching, if you like, of our time. My friend and I were discussing it, and she was saying, well, it's in everything. She said it's promoted through the media. Children are learning it at school. She said every walk of life, people are basically being driven by these teachings that promote greed, self-interest. It's all about me. We, from even a nation-state point of view, we have our own cultural stories about wars and carry on. But if we all came together as a global community, those huge national interest subjects, which they say build a nation-state, would no longer be necessary. What we really have to do now is to start looking at the globe as our home, as our family. The economic system clearly doesn't work. I was trained in economics. I know it doesn't work because it's got infinite growth modelling. It has no input in the equations in respect of the denuding of the resources. In economic growth, we count every bit of activity. So that can be pollution. It can be any form of externality that is damaging to people or damaging to the environment. Even war is economic growth if that country is producing armaments and that's sending a monetary or profit signal when they do the books. So that then becomes economically a good, even though globally it's not. When you hurt other people, it's never a good. Life and the cut and thrust of it, we are hurting one another significantly. I mean, I just had another conversation with a guy in the service station because I got my coffee. He is South African. He was a nice guy, actually. And he was just in front of the coffee machine, and there was a closed for cleaning sign. I said, "Oh, look, there's a closed for cleaning sign. You'll have to wait." And he goes, "Oh, I didn't see that." I said, "I was busy thinking." I said, "Yeah, I know. We're always thinking and we don't see, do we? Because we get too preoccupied." And he goes, "Yeah, that's true." And he goes, "The world's sped up, hasn't it?" He said, I was just talking to someone else about that the other day. He said, "It's just out of control. It's too fast." And, they're talking about automation. And I said, "Yeah, it is too fast." And I said, "We don't have time for each other. We're too busy doing," and it is the operative word there, is doing, not being. We're in our heads a lot. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the mind that preoccupies you from really noticing what's around. And he was saying, "Oh, it's technology. So the technology is just moving us too fast." And I said, "I agree." And I definitely agree with that. I, having pretty much been one of the first generations to really embrace computers, because when I was young, I was working at a TAFE, actually. It was my first job, I think. And I was on the big Wangs, big computers with the 3 1/4 floppy disks. Reel-to-reel tape we had as backing up what we were typing up. There was no NBN as LAN networks where people can actually look at what you're doing now. Technology back then, we had multiple platforms in respect of word processing, for example. There was WordPerfect. There was lots of them. I had about 13 packages that I was good at. When I was in temping, I got to see a lot of stuff. But these days we've got one platform, Microsoft. It's all reducing down to one, which means that one company can control through software, through upgrading. We don't even know what they're upgrading on our computers. We don't know to what extent the tracking is going on, although Edward Snowden in his film talked about the ability for them to look through computer screens at you, even when it's off. And you just go, for those of us on the ground, it's like we just go, "You have got to be kidding me." Listening to all our phone calls, all our discussions, putting an ad, popping it up on the phone. I've had that many people say to me, "I don't know if I'm imagining things, but when I was talking to my friend about this, she said an ad came up." And I said, "Yeah, they've voice recorded you. They are monitoring what you're saying, and then they're putting an ad in accordance with what you're speaking about." This is taking privacy and intrusion to another level. And because there's power in those companies, because of the money, because we value the money, and this is the greed, and we connect it to security. Without it, we think it's all poverty. It's not. I've even thought if everyone just continued working without pay, I'm not suggesting we do that, but I'm saying that if you did, everything still runs, right? So any collapse is because we want the money. We're not working for the sake of it. We're working for the money. So what's driving those decisions, even in Silicon Valley, where the big high-tech companies pretty much emanate from? They're also emanating from Israel now. I notice Israel's got a huge IT sector. China, of course, Huawei or whatever they're called, and many, many, many others. I mean, there's, 1.6 billion people in China. It's a huge country. They are also caught up in the same dis-ease. And it is punctuated by the word dis-ease. Because you've got to keep running on that hamster wheel. No matter who you are, you could be the CEO, employees, it doesn't really matter. Everybody's running. And then the mantra of everyone has to work because we've got to keep it all going, and because structures of debt were created. And they were created deliberately as part of the fractional reserve banking, lending out money. So the money lending is a big issue because people are making money from nothing, and we're talking digital money here. People are making interest from that, and there's no physical anything. You've only got 10% on reserve in respect of physical money, so that doesn't cost a great deal to print. In Australia, we would have the Mint, which is down in Canberra. So this indebtedness becomes the chattel, becomes the chain that keeps us on the hamster wheel. And there will be narratives around that good people work, bad people don't. People who don't contribute economically have no value, which is untrue. The world existed way before the beginning of agriculture or the beginning of cultivation in communities. Prior to that, it was nomadic tribes moving, and they would be moving in response to seasons and where the food is plentiful. So where we are right now, geographically, is 1 minute to midnight. We're 1 minute to midnight. Prior to that, there has been a lot of evolution on the planet which had no economic system whatsoever. It was the human beings that created it through the medium of exchange. Typical in tribal communities, they would exchange things. And that was actually a far more accurate supply and demand signal, was through exchange. Like, you give me this, I give you that. It was actually teaching on the basis of giving. That's why the tribes were very sophisticated. People like to think that they're primitive. They weren't. They were actually very, very socially sophisticated. They had real order in the tribe, and there were authorities, obviously, in the tribe, but there was a lot of love as a family because it was a small group. In the big cities, which everybody's piling us all into, and building huge infrastructure projects in order to alleviate the traffic congestion, that puts us further into debt with the private-public equity financing arrangements. And again, it's the denial of, are we actually going to work towards a sustainable future, or are we doing business as usual, but in another way and calling it sustainable? I personally have the opinion that we are still on the same economic juggernaut, no different. The only real issues we're really confronting, and these are big issues, they're not small, is the disruption through automation and AI. And I do want to talk about automation and AI. Some of my jobs that I did when I was temping, I've worked in hundreds and hundreds of companies, and I've worked in factories. I've worked in sponge making. Sounds funny. It was a process of creating sponges, I remember. And I've been in factory lines. I've seen them putting things together. I've certainly, when I was trained in economics, was looking at the automation, so use of robots in what they called islands of automation. These were coming out of really the Marshall Plan in Japan, the US influence there, where they automated many of the factories. And of course, the Japanese became a powerhouse when it came to producing cars. And there's a whole story around the production of cars around the planet and the pollution, etc., the externality of pollution that's come from it. I'm just feeling to go still for a little bit. Yeah, the profit motive and greed is at the heart of automation as well, because they wanted robots to replace labour because they didn't want to pay labour. The whole tension between what has been deemed as management and employees or unions is all come down to money. It's not that the unions are this or that, or the management are this or that. It's just that there's greed sitting there where they want to maximise profits, because that's how we work the equations. That's how we personally benefit, is from that profit at the end of the day. So that's your revenue minus expenditure minus taxation, gives you your net profit, which is the bottom line for them. And they think that the wealth is the signal, if you like, of success. Well, in an economic system, there's truth in that. In a life system, in a self-actualization system, it's actually the opposite. The more you have, the less you have, in actual fact. It all depends on how you choose to see what's of value in the world. For me personally, I'm finding the less I have, the more I have. I have more time. I have more creativity. I have more freedom to live the life in accordance with inner promptings or inner signals that move me. So that inner prompting now is moving me back to automation and AI. Isn't that interesting? And that's what I'm becoming sensitive to. So I'll just go silent again. The automation, again, has come out of problems with people, disputes, power imbalances, where those who are in control of those resources have wanted to smooth things. They don't want to have the conflict. They don't want to have the hassle. They don't want the legal action. So they try to reduce the power of those who are of competing interests. Because one group is living in a certain lifestyle that it wants to maintain. The other group is pretty much on survival wages, and this is the inequality that's been structured into the design of economics. When I studied economics, we didn't talk about inequality, but we talked about supply and demand and optimizing price. And always there was the drive through the equations to minimize the cost in order to maximize profit. When people become a cost of production, there's always the push to minimize their wages. In Australia, we used to have the Arbitration Commission, which was set up to create a national wage case, so there were nationally consistent wages. So whatever job you did, you would be paid the same as someone on the other side of the country is doing the same job. Of course, the gender issue is a consistent problem, and it suggests that inequality still very strongly exists between men and women. And the value of women's work is seen as valueless, even though the very functioning of the human being as a balanced person is fundamental to the ongoing continuance of a species. But because there's no economic value placed on it, other than nannies or, they tend to factor it in like that, house cleaners, and because that's all they think that role is about, when in actual fact the deep nurturing between the mother and the child is essential for emotional stability for the child. The disconnected pathological mindsets we're seeing today are a result of over mind identification. It's an imbalance. See, the human being was never meant to be engaged in one task and one task alone, where their whole objective of life was to think through this and think through that and continue thinking. Whilst the thinking mechanism is a very important part of the human condition, the emotional intelligence is the one that's been suppressed. It's often been identified as the feminine because, she's over-emotional. Calm down, be rational. All these things have been embedded narratives that have seen the expression of emotion as out of control or problematic, when people want to sedate things so that things run smoothly. They don't want to confront the challenge of that emotion that's coming up because there's an imbalance happening. So when people get angry, it's because they see something as unfair. And this is why we promote dialogue and conflict resolution, in order for people to not jump to conclusions, to not suppress or harm one another, but to actually sit down and hear each other. That very basic and simple process is actually what maintains a sense of cooperation. The word order came up, but that was quickly replaced by cooperation as I was thinking it through and feeling it through. Cooperation means we are agreeing to engage on a task together. When there's a problem, we sit down and we work the problem out. This is how we learn problem-solving skills. There's a confidence that grows from that. So in our world, because men are not particularly good at communication, which they're not wired that way. Women are natural communicators. That's why I'm communicating. It's very natural for me to do it. And people could be disparaging around the length of it, but that's the nature of the feminine who are wired for communication. That's why we are good parents, why we're good mothers. Not all of us, of course, and I'm not making a biased judgment there, because I've seen mothers who aren't. But let's just say, in general, the giving of birth of the children has come through the female. And the reason for that is because the feminine has highly developed emotional intelligence. She is the gracile aspect of the species. The masculine is more robust, larger. He typically has instincts to protect the woman and the family, very deep instincts. Men can be very noble in the protection of those they love. Men can suffer a great deal too at the emotional lashings of others as well. So I'm not looking just with one eye in many respects and saying that the world is in accordance with females and they're far more superior. No, they're not. Women have a lot to learn about, moving forward similarly to the masculine and taking responsibility and, learning some mechanics, which women can easily do if they're encouraged. They have the capacity to do engineering and mechanics. I've met women who are very orientated that way. That's why I often talk about the feminine and the masculine within the human condition. Some women are very masculine and they're very good at those logical, mechanical skills. Some women are very feminine. They're excellent at communication skills. They're very good nurturers. They see the emotional landscape immediately. Some men can't see it at all. Some women can't see it at all, as they bounce through life, leaving a trail of destruction behind them. So going back to greed, going back to mechanisation, going back to automation, labour saving, the imbalance that's going to be created through unemployment. I do actually think we should move out of employment because I consider it a form of slavery. Most people are not doing what they love. If they were doing what they love, I'd be all for it. But because I can see they're doing it because they're paying mortgages, they're caught in income traps. They have children, they have responsibilities, they can't just opt out. Many of them are getting very stressed because it's sped up. As I discussed at the beginning of this video, the man I spoke to in the service station was talking about the speed. The technology was supposed to be labour saving. We were supposed to have more leisure time. That's how it was sold. But in actual fact, they have, because of the greed, that's unchecked and it's unconscious. They have gone on ahead, creating more and more technology, and it's come to a point where they're going to replace a lot of labour now. So we're talking 40 to 50% unemployment. But what's concerning about these structural changes or disruptions is the pathological mindset that's driving it, that feels nothing for the emotional fallout, for the physical fallout of those who end up in extreme poverty. I've been homeless for 2 years now. It's been a very, very interesting experience. Predominantly what I've seen is the lack of emotional response. I saw this in conflicts as well. I saw that people were not responding to the emotional discord that they were causing through their behaviour, and they weren't self-reflective enough to even know or understand how they were impacting on others. Because we've created these hierarchies, people are not speaking up at different levels within the hierarchy. And I know that. I've worked in 400 companies. I've seen it firsthand. They all stay silent. They talk amongst themselves in a tea break, but they'll never tell management. And that's because they buy into the idea that they're insecure if they lose their jobs. I know from my own experience that another world opens up when you are no longer in the workforce. From my perspective, what opened up for me was the real world. And this is the real world. At first it was really hard because I felt myself sort of out of the mainstream, no longer in a job. So, you go to a dinner party, not that I got invited to many, I haven't, but I had in the past. People say, oh, what do you do? Oh, actually, I'm working for humanity. I'd say that now. Or I might say, I just go down to the shops and get a coffee and start reading. And I might say, well, what do you do? What else do you do? Do you go out? No, I don't. Are you looking for a man? No, I'm not. And they might think, oh, how sad is that? What a life. She doesn't go out and keep busy. I do actually keep very, very busy, but it's in things that I'm drawn to. So I'm living out of every moment what I desire to do, I'm doing. This is part of self-actualization because my whole focus is on the inner desires being actualized. Now, that could only happen in a circumstance where I've moved out of work. I could have got a workplace bullying business going and it would have been successful for sure because I've got real skill in this area. But I realised that it wasn't really about creating the world in the image of what the world says I should be doing. I came to understand that the workplace bullying, well-being work was really in the life experience. It's got nothing to do with the money. The problem with the money is that I would then be delivering training programs to fulfill the needs of industry, but I would lose that lived experience, which is absolutely essential to be able to identify and see the root causes of the discord or the bullying or dis-ease. I had to also go through it myself. That's why I often call those who I've had conflict with my teachers, because they put me through training. They didn't deliberately or consciously seek to do that. But nonetheless, I was aware enough to see that I was going through a process of awakening. And you can't do that unless you have your opposite number turn up. And this one's going to look upon you as disruptive, difficult, problematic. Their own fears and paranoias will come up in relation to you being a threat, particularly if you speak the truth like I do. Their whole world is built upon a framework, an investment, a collective agreement that the world should be a certain way. Now, when others compromise their values and their virtues in order to promote ways of being that deliver economic growth trajectories at the expense of human growth trajectories, then people come into a group think that says what I'm doing is right and what that other person is doing is problematic. You see that with the left-right narrative, which I see as total bunk. I was really surprised when I realised there was political undertones and also gender undertones. These things surprised me because I don't think like that. And then I came to see, oh, yeah, they're using politics. They're saying this is left wing, this is right wing, and then that justifies the attack on that other side rather than solving the problem of these two orientations, which is actually in yourself. They don't see that. They see it as the enemy is outside themselves. It's not. So they are believing in an enemy that's going to take something from them. And this is the first lie. In actual fact, what you see in your world is an aspect of yourself when you start to come into the life as the reality, not economic growth, not groupthink, not shared delusional beliefs in a system that is unquestioned. See, because I'm outside of the structure and I'm not with any group and I'm not, responding to other viewpoints, I'm actually looking at life with a clearer focus. I have no vested interest to put out into the media a certain viewpoint. There's no monetary gain for me. There's no popular gain for me because I would be bumping up against what would be considered norms. And at the very core essence of bullying is a fear of that difference. That's why people put power over other people. They want to suppress the very thing they don't want to hear. And yet, from a life perspective, which is where I'm coming from, that very challenge is the portal through which they could move into greater understanding of themselves, which would bring them closer to happiness. The very thing that comes to you that's a threat in some way is actually a possible door opening. Byron Katie, who I've talked about in the past, is probably one of the most clear thinkers and feelers that I've come across. Some will say, oh, she's new age, she's this and that. These are all projections. None of it's true. And she would actually be the first to say that because she's living in a world without a story. So even no matter what you project onto someone else as a label is never true. It's your label that you have plastered over them because something within you is denying an aspect or denying a truth. That's the only time we divide off is when we're in denial. Unity is full acceptance and allowance of what is as part of the life experience. So it's not conceptualized, it's not compartmentalized, it's not put in boxes, it's not segmented out in order to logically deal with it later. This is typically how the males think. When you're in a relational mindset, which is synergistic, which is holistic, which is without boundary, becoming increasingly unlimited, where one is not resisting ideas, but one is embracing ideas, that's when you start to come into the realm of innovation. Pioneering new ideas is how that vista opens up, but you have to be fearless in the expression of countering truths or alternative truths that others consider to be disruptive to their worldview. In actual fact, it's the very diversity which you cannot control that exists in our planet, on our planet, in our societies, coming from unique individuals who all have unique DNA, who are all different but similar, socialised similarly. So it's very important to embrace what you fear. The Indigenous, as I mentioned in the previous video, this was something I heard through the Pachamama Alliance. I came across them when I was in South America. I went to one meeting, found them very interesting. They were the Indigenous people. They're talking about Mother Earth. They're trying to revive the oneness because they had such a deep connectedness to the earth. They weren't disconnected through technology. So the technologies disconnect you immediately from the living organisms. Now, those who identify strongly as technocrats will defend the image of technology because they believe their future is dependent on it. But again, that's another form of slavery. It's another form of attachment, that these things must come to pass in order for me to make money, in order for me to have control, in order for me to have this and that. But these, in my opinion, are untrue when you start to question from a perspective of truth and happiness, if you really want to be happy. The disconnection from life never brings happiness. The detachment from another's suffering means you're detached from your own. So what you do to another is you do to yourself. That's why I say that. It's a literal fact. The technology creates heightened detachment from other people. We start to objectivize through technology. Like people looking at this video, for example, will see me as an object on the screen. Until you sit in front of me, until you come into the space with me on a human-to-human level, you're going to see me as an object. If you're coming from a highly objectivized way of seeing, you will, the words dismember, it's like you will break up. You will see concepts. You will see an object talking that could influence other objects talking. Your world becomes one of disconnection, where you don't feel the pain, because that's why you disconnect. It's a disassociation. It's a mental health issue in actual fact. It evolves into that. And of course, that breaks down the actual human condition itself, because human beings need to connect. The human condition is one of connecting with everything in actual fact, not just the Internet of Things, but everything. You can connect with the blade of grass. You can connect with the wind. You can connect with the taste of something. You can connect with the poetic words that come to you to inspire you around love and romance and beauty, content, not outline, because we hunger for the content of life. We think it's in all the material things. It's not. You can fill your house and still be empty. You can never fill up when your identification becomes with things outside yourself. Because what the true connection is within. It's to connect with the spirit of who you are. When you pass on from this life, and you do, you continue on. So this becomes just a temporary movement through the physical in order to experience the taste, the touch, the feel, the separation in order to reunite. That's actually why we're going through the earth experience. From a spiritual point of view, we're here to expand on the experience of humanity. Now, the disruption through the AI and the automation will be another expansion of the evolution of humanity, and it will, because people will rail against it, and they will. The man in the shop that I spoke to, he just said, none of this will work. He says, they don't realise. And I said, I know they don't, because they're all operating, and those of you who are listening to this, you're operating in silos of self-reinforcing belief systems that says people can't say no. They all have to say yes. They all have to comply. If they don't comply, they're punished. This is the old paradigm, which is about control. You may well want to create the transhumanism so people fuse with technology to move forward that idea of this automated world. It won't work because the human spirit doesn't want it. And the human spirit is what is moving all of us in our life journey. We're all here for a purpose. And that can't be genetically modified. That can't be influenced or altered even by those who may well have considerable ability. The spirit of things is what is much more powerful than the Internet of Things. The spirit is what created all the things. It's not a pineal gland. You can't alter it through chemicals. One can cause great disruption through health issues such as cancer. Continue to pollute the earth and ignore that externality and say, I don't take responsibility for my impact on the world. But as I've said to many of you, what you put out returns, and this is a universal law. This is not punishment. There is no punishment in the universe. The universe operates, particularly where we are, through cause and effect. So life itself responds immediately. The moment you put out a thought, the moment you do an action, life will mirror back to you an experience, because we're all connected. Even when we think we're disconnected emotionally, we're all connected. So whatever transpires within the human condition gets passed amongst people, but there's also a purpose in which everyone comes into life. There's a blueprint in which they're coming here. All of us have a purpose. I didn't know I was to be a peacemaker till I dreamed I was teaching peace. And then everything from that point on became about peace. And there was no effort in me choosing to become a peacemaker. There was no effort. It was natural as breathing. And yet within my own life, I don't always have peace. I can get upset and frustrated and angry and all the rest of it, just like everyone else. That's why I've often said I don't walk on water. I'm human. But I'm open to the truth, you see, and that's how this wisdom and knowledge comes to me. And then it becomes, for me, my objective. It's not even the right word, objective. It's more aspiration. Aspiration is more accurate. Would be to become that peace that I'm inspired by, because I see great joy in the peace, you see. And peace is not inactivity. When I was teaching peace to kids, they thought it was boring, you know, but I came to them as a clown where it wasn't boring at all. It was exciting, you know, juggling and having fun. See, peace is actually a lot more fun. But you're coming at life without fear, you see. It's fearlessness in truth. When you're in peace, you have no fear because you realize you're connected to all of it, and that there is nothing that can really hurt you ultimately. If we're all coming from spirit and we go back to spirit, well, then you're fine. And if you believe, like I do, that whatever happens to you in your life is meant to happen, then you're not going to be in a state of revenge or feeling resentful because I should be running a company, or I should be in a family, I should have had children. You know, I could easily run off a few things that could be shoulds and shouldn'ts. But when I accept life as it is, and I know that it's in perfect order as it is, and that could be in a homeless capacity, that could be without a partner, that could be with $5 in my bank account. If I see that as perfect and exactly what I want, because what I want is what I've got, if I believe that, which I do, then there's no loss. I don't feel any jealousy. I don't feel it should have been another way. I feel it's exactly the way it's meant to be. And why do I think that? Because I've created it at a higher level. So when you're coming from a spiritual perspective rather than an economic perspective, everything changes. You change. And when you change and you come into harmony with life, because that's what this thinking does, if I was not in homeostasis, then I'm not in harmony with the planet. But if my philosophy, if my lived experience without resistance is bringing me joy, then I know I'm in harmony with Earth systems. That's why I said my blog was Peace is Our True Nature. I wasn't joking, or maybe I could joke with that. Joking's good as well. What that means is the true peace is the sustainability. It's not about economic growth being the true prosperity, being the true abundance, being the true security. It's actually the opposite. The more we continue on economic growth modelling, the more we're undermining our own security. And yes, there are people who are doing bases on Mars and have done so for quite a long time. It's not new. And the moon. That could be very exciting for many who go, oh, wow, private sector, we can go into space. You know, what happens when we shoot rockets into the moon? What happens to the menstrual cycle of women? They won't be thinking about that. And there has been, I believe from what I've read, there has been a rocket fired up into the moon. I read it a while ago now, but I remember thinking, oh my God, imagine if that was a nuclear device and they blew up a third of the moon, that would have massive implications for Earth. I don't know if I really should even talk about that, because there's always some crazy person out there who goes, oh, let's do it. But fear would stop me speaking like that. Love won't, because everything's as it should be. See how the fear gets de-escalated immediately by the truth of matters, which is everything is as it should be, and there's nothing to fear but fear itself. Fear is false evidence appearing real. So once I become more tuned into myself and I feel a fear rise, I can transmute it with the truth. That's why the truth sets you free. I've written it many times in my poetry, and it's true. It's coming from a higher perspective. So going back to the scenario of the moon, or the menstrual cycles get changed because women are governed by the moon. You see, we're actually connected directly to it. Our moods, everything is impacted by the moon. It's interesting that I wonder what it is in the moon. Like, obviously it's a gravitational pull. The moon is traveling around the Earth in an elliptical trajectory. It's not traveling in a round one. It's elliptical. So that's to do with the magnetics of the planet. It's to do with the magnetics of the sun. Isn't it fascinating? I'm just going to take us on a journey to the sun, center of the universe. Our universe, as many suns as billions of them, actually. When you start to expand right out, you just go, oh God, we're nothing compared to the entire thing. And yet the entire fabric of space would be changed if the Earth wasn't here, because everything's connected. See, we have come from cosmic origins. We forget that because we're so contained within an Earth ship. But we come from cosmic origins. So out in the cosmos, every single material, this is a material cosmos I'm talking about. There's a spiritual cosmos as well, of course. The material cosmos is completely connected with every material thing. So if the Earth blew up, it would be felt throughout the entire cosmos, because everything's connected. Therefore, the smallest of things is as important as the greatest of things in terms of we typically see it as size. That's the way we think. But if we were to step into a cosmic way of thinking, I don't think we would be thinking anything like the way we think. But we can't even imagine that, because we only know what we're taught. Till you go still and really seek to empty of belief systems. See, the word black hole came up for me just then. Black hole, go into a black hole. I'm just going to play with this. You can come along with me. No light in a black hole. Dense. I just want to go deeper into that, actually. See, the words dynamics come up because of the density of the black hole. Everything being drawn into it. And then you get the folds of space. Folds in space. Time travel. It's quite extraordinary when you think, and I'm certain there's a certain man I have in mind who's very much interested in space travel. And of course, the militaries, or particularly the US military, are very aware of it. Philadelphia experiment comes to mind. But the things that come up for me when I consider this black hole is that until humanity gets its act together, spiritually speaking, those vistas, there will be vistas that they cannot access because they're not mature enough, not responsible enough. It's not even that, it's vibrational. The cosmos, as far, I mean, I don't know that much about it, obviously. I'm just going from my inner feeling here. Cosmos is vibrational. Like attracts like. It's a little bit like the camel moving through the needle scenario that the Christians talk about. You can move through these things, but you have to have the right vibration in order to see. And you're seeing from within, you're not seeing with the physical eyes, you're actually seeing. So we think our world is what we see. I see, therefore I believe, is typically the way the world works in respect of its knowledge base. I would probably say I go still, therefore I see, because things come up for me when I go still. And the stillness is really just moving into what I call 0 point. No one's taught me that, but that's what I've felt intuitively. It's 0 point. What does that mean? It means no thing. It's getting the mind out of the way in order to feel out for alternative truths. It's a little bit like pioneering, exploring. I'm exploring in this way. My poetry is the same. I find myself just writing stuff that I had no idea I was going to write. It just comes to me because I'm getting my ego out of the way. It's not about me. And someone could do a profile on me and say, she's a this and she's a that and she's done this. But in actual fact, it's not really. If you were to go deeper, how would you word it? Yeah, you see the human being as a vehicle, really, and these ideas come through you. You know, you look at all the great inventions across humanity, they've come out of the blue. You know, Tesla is a great example of that. He often got ideas that came to him. So who are we really? Who knows? I mean, the identity and all of that is all untrue as well. So even when we're seeking surveillance states, trying to identify and profile in order to control, what is it that we're identifying? What is true? How deep do you want to go down that rabbit hole? So it just depends on, you know, how you want to see, how you choose to live, how important truth is. For me, truth is the true foundation. It's like it's a grounding. I'm not saying everything I say is the total truth. I wouldn't have a clue. I just know if something feels right. And because I'm tuning into myself more and more, I'm just noticing what comes up more consistently. And I just sit with it. And because I've got an open mind, I don't discount things just because they don't form into my mindset of what should be or shouldn't be or what's right, what's wrong, because I'm not living like that. I'm seeking out truth, which may not have that texture of my education in it. You have to have a very open mind, which means I could be wrong. That's where the open mind comes from, is I could be wrong. And that's not saying you failed. That's not saying, oh my God, I didn't get it right. I need to get it right in order to have power. No, I might have it wrong is great. It's like, okay, the mind opens again. It's not unlike this. Remember, I found this when I was in Canberra. It's a bodhi. I see it as bodhi flower. What do they call it? The lily lotus. It's a lotus. But the first words that came to me were bodhi, the bodhi tree, Buddha. Because the example I'm giving you is sort of like, it's like when you open your mind. Okay, let's start with a seed idea. You start to open your mind. The first set of petals open up. I don't know if you can see. First set of petals open up like that. The rest are contained. So you're getting first level of ideas coming in as you open the mind. So what I do when I go deeper, the next level opens. So we get 2 levels. And if I want to go deeper, so I'm challenging or exploding myths within my own mind of what's true, because I'm not holding on to truth as my identity, then the next petals will open. You go, ah. So then I go, okay, well, maybe I'm wrong. Let's look further. Then the next lot opens. And that's how you create the symmetry. This is this is coming to me now. Geometry, sacred geometry. And this is actually the Fibonacci spiral of flower. So check out Fibonacci spiral. It's the blueprint of nature. And what the spiral is, and I'll just show you here on my ring, that's the spiral. See, I've got a leaf there on my finger. The spiral is expansion of consciousness. So we're kind of at a point in time where our consciousness is about to do a big jump. And that is a blueprint itself. We are part of a universe. And my understanding from what I've read, this is reading, not inspiration, is that this planet's not the only one. So it's like it's going to happen. And similarly to the smart cities idea, it's going to happen. You've all got to say yes. Well, cosmically speaking, there is another perspective. What would I call it? I'll just choose another word because it's not even right. It's like at another level. Even that doesn't feel right. Moving along the spiral is inevitable. It's like you have to move along the spiral to expand. Nothing can stop that because these are greater forces outside of our own willpower. Because we're part of the cosmos, all of us, we're all part of this growth. I've often talked about the dark and the light element, creating the contrast, which is the launching pad of expansion. So there is no enemy in the world. There are simply the clashing it up between this and that in order to get to something bigger. And in this sort of expanded consciousness, we see no enemy. So the whole military thing disappears and they'll go, oh my God, we don't want that to disappear. We need to anchor in the fear because that's what keeps this industry going. But what they're not understanding is that they're going to go on to greater and greater things. They won't need it. It's like a little child letting go of a toy. You grow out of it. That's what this is about. It's about the growing out of fear-based cultures. That's what we're doing. Now, before that happens, it's a little bit like the arm wrestle. You know how you get the arm wrestle and you go, and then ping, it comes back. That's what's happening. So things have to fully be experienced, like the IT sector, all that has to happen as part of the evolution of humanity, and it is. And so they become not the enemy, they become part of the very springboard into this new consciousness because they're not separate from us. We're all together. They are me, I am them. I'm an aspect of them. That's how merged we all are. But we appear to be separate. So the shifting of the consciousness just simply expands what you see. So rather than seeing just the seed or the bud, which was the initial consciousness, if you like, we could just squeeze it right down. So rather than just seeing that one thing, as your consciousness grows, you start to see more and more and you go, oh, that's what that means. So there is no loss in any of this. There is only your happy destiny being unavoidable, and that's what I say in poetry. Your happy destiny is unavoidable. But I guess you get to that point when you get to that point, and you get there when you're ready. So I just felt to extrapolate out from the greed issue, which was raised in the beginning, which was the actual bud of this video, was greed. It was starting with the real estate agent property, the belief in property as wealth, as identity, as status, as value. 2, expanding that lotus, which is what I've been doing through my videos, not just this one, but many, to say the greed is a disease, dis-ease, stress, I have to keep working in order to make it bigger and bigger and bigger. I'm not enough because you've not dealt with the lack of self-love, which is the emotional disconnect. Once you come back into harmony, you will integrate your emotions by, rather than blocking them or suppressing things you don't want to hear or avoiding conflict, you will actually embrace the very uncomfortable feelings that you have as the very portal that takes you to peace. So as I said with the Pachamama stuff, the indigenous, they run towards conflict. They don't run away from it. That's your warrior energy. And what it really means is we face all things. It's not about going and hurting other people and calling that heroism. It's about facing the very fear that drives the behavior, because it's the fear we're all fighting. We're fighting it by creating security systems. We're fighting it by creating income. We're fighting it by ensuring we don't deal with things that upset us. But we're not really getting to the bud of that dis-ease. And the reason our ecological system collapses is because we're out of harmony with the whole, because we're part of the whole. We're not separate. Even though we live in houses and we go out into nature for a holiday, we're still part of the natural system. We're still biological. The nature is responding to us and we're responding to it on conscious and unconscious levels. This is the truth of the matter. So again, with that bodhi flower, it is opening and opening and opening to greater aspects of awareness, all of which is in service of peace. We're ultimately wanting peace, all of us. Even those who are accumulating lots of money, they all want peace too. But they think it's going to happen through automation or control, AI. But what they'll find is a whole new array of problems will come with that they haven't foreseen, because they're out of balance. Because the natural order, the cosmic order, you cannot control. It's beyond space and time would be probably the more accurate way of seeing it. It's an intelligence that's way beyond artificial intelligence. It's an intelligence that has created all of it, inclusive of the artificial intelligence. That can be hard for people to get their heads around. So we've never been in control. We never will be in control, because this is not about control. It's about allowance. It's about letting the life unfold as it should. It's about having the courage to face everything that comes to you that causes you discomfort. Rather than hating the other, it's about looking at the discomfort within you, taking full responsibility that you may well be out of harmony because you're believing something that's not true. You come into harmony when you're in alignment with real truth. These are not concepts. These are integral awarenesses that harmonize with the greater whole. So I think I'll finish this, but I'm gonna finish it with, it's funny, I put this in my car now, a Buddha, and I'm not a Buddhist, but I love that image. See, that's the stillness. That image is peace. Someone who's come home to who they really are. They're in balance with the greater cosmos, is what that image is really talking about. They have recognized they're not separate. So with that, I send you peace, harmony, love, joy. See, that's the tree of life. That's another amazing image. As above, so below. In fact, I will finish on peace because it's kind of nice. Your happy destiny is unavoidable. Thanks for watching and listening. Bye.